Hello and welcome to this discussion about the benefits and disadvantages of Scottish independence. My name is Craig and I will be discussing the advantages of staying in the Union for Scotland as a country. I'm with David McEwen,
Hi, David.
who will be discussing the advantages of Scotland gaining its independence.
Some of the advantages. The referendum has come around due to the Scottish National Party gaining an outright majority in the Scottish Parliament in the 2011 Scottish elections, and the manifesto in which they promised to have a referendum. And with that agreement eventually being agreed with, David Cameron coming to Edinburgh to sign the now called Edinburgh Agreement in October last year to legalise the referendum. The claims and the ideas that Scotland would be able to justify itself as an independent country, to rule itself more fairly and more socially just than the current United Kingdom parties. This includes, for example, the new tax which the Conservative Party in the British government have brought in last month, the bedroom tax, which will affect over 100,000 families in Scotland, despite the fact that only one seat out of 59 in Westminster is held by the Conservatives.
What I would say to that in response is that the issue of independence isn't a policy issue. It's not about parties, because although we have an SNP government just now, within 5 or maybe 10 years it could be Labour, it could be Liberals, it could be the Greens, who are very well represented. So I think to talk about Labour or Conservative policies is maybe to distract us from like the important facts. What do you feel is the main benefit to Scotland as a country?
I think one of the main benefits of independence is at least to be able to govern ourselves with our own parties, rather than being governed by parties in Westminster which have such little representation in Scotland. As you said, the parties have different wings, as well as the Scottish National Party, obviously Scottish Labour, the Scottish Conservatives. So there are different parties on both wings which are available in Scotland. But with the Scottish National Party having promised a referendum, I think after independence it'll then be up to the Scottish people to decide which parties they feel have their best representation. But at the moment, I think the National Party has its importance and has its majority, because people aren't happy at the way things are being run from Westminster, and firstly like that change to have an independent parliament and then to change the government from there.
Okay, so you don't believe that the power Scotland currently has are sufficient, or that greater devolution instead of becoming an independent country would be the best route for Scotland?
At the moment, there are good arguments for devolution, but I believe that it's only with independence, having complete control over the economy and with the resources which would come along with that, if Scotland was to be an independent European Union country, it would be the EU's largest supplier of oil and natural gas, and as well as the largest fishing industry in the EU, and one of the most forward-thinking renewable countries, with the current SNP target of having 100% of Scotland's electrical needs met by 2020. At the moment it's currently at 40%.
It's true what you say about the massive revenues that come from the oil industry, particularly in the northeast of Scotland. However, there's a finite resource, which experts say will run out within 30 to 40 years, most likely. So given that, do you not believe that the Scottish economy is stronger at the moment with the shared risk with the rest of the United Kingdom, which we've seen in the recent crisis, which we were able to pull together, and Britain actually managed in European terms relatively well?
Yes, I think that's a good point, because oil and natural gas will run out. However, there are conflicting views. There was one survey which was recently carried out which suggests that North Sea oil will now last long after 2055. And I think especially over the last several decades in which the way that the oil from the North Sea, which currently goes to Westminster, and then they divide by population. So Scotland receives around 8.4% of that. Despite the fact of that oil, over 90% of it would actually be in Scottish water if we were to become independent, which would be an extra resource of tens of millions of pounds each year. And there was a document published in the 1970s by Westminster, the Macron Report, which shows that, and it was hidden for 30 years, and so it only came into public information in 2005, that showed that with the extra oil revenue, Scotland would be better off without the Union, and that for the first time Scotland would actually have Europe's second strongest currency after the Norwegian kroner. However, that's 30 years of oil which is gone, and that can't be replaced. However, there is still a good future in North Sea oil, many jobs and a lot of wealth to bring into Scotland within that time, and I think it's good to take advantage of that.
It's interesting that you mentioned the subject of currency, actually, because that's obviously something that's been causing some amount of debate over this whole issue. Do you believe that Scotland would become part of the euro, remain with sterling, or form its own currency?
I think those are with three very strong arguments, and the current idea, the current goal of the current Scottish National Party is that we continue to use and continue to be part of a sterling zone after independence, which is because it is proven to be a strong currency. I think I'm not in complete agreement with that, because if you're then to become independent and then to continue to use sterling would mean having your currency again ran and financed and taxed by the Bank of England, in which case you'd have a foreign country running your currency. However, the other ideas or suggestions of joining the euro, I think at the moment, with so many European countries needing to be bailed out, and with the euro being at its weakest point in comparison to the pound, to join the euro would also not benefit Scotland in general. Another option of having an own independent Scottish currency, I think, would be difficult in these times, with the general economic problems that there are in these years. To begin to use a new currency, I think, would be quite difficult. So although I think staying with the pound is a risk in having a foreign country regulate your currency, it's probably the strongest option.
It's certainly true that the sterling is a very strong currency. But is there not a risk that when Scotland applies to join the EU, that membership of the Eurozone will be made a prerequisite?
This is true. I think it's now a prerequisite for all new European Union countries to join the euro. However, this being said, this is part of the European argument where whether Scotland would be regarded as a new European Union country, because as part of the United Kingdom has been part of the EU for the last several decades. And there are various conflicting views on this. The view of the Scottish Government is that negotiations will take place to rejoin the EU, but it will continue to be a European Union country while these discussions take place. However, many parties in England, including the British government, have suggested that Scotland will first of all have to leave the European Union and then have to seek to become a member again separately, which would include all other European countries having to agree to let Scotland in, which would obviously involve the conflicting cases in Spain since they have the Basque Country and Catalonia, which also, if Spain were to grant Scotland EU membership, then I'd perhaps push Catalonia for independence further as well. Brussels and the European Commission has said that they do have an opinion on this, but it has to be asked by them by a member state of the EU. And as the member state is the United Kingdom based in Westminster, it's up to Westminster to ask the European Commission for their opinion on it of what would happen. But Westminster have refused to give their opinion and have refused to ask. So they have a debate saying that, no one knows whether Scotland would be in or out of the EU, but it's up to them to ask what the official opinion is, and they refuse to do that.
So you believe that David Cameron's refusal to seek legal advice from the European Commission is a sign that he believes their advice would be that Scotland renegotiate its membership rather than apply to enter into the European Union?
Yeah. I think there are several arguments which are currently in the dark, and so long as these arguments are in the dark, people are quite happy to vote no, because generally humans are rather conservative people. They don't want too much change if they don't know the exact benefits that you would reap from it. And so the fact of this issue not being known, along with the other issues which are dependent on the United Kingdom as the member state asking, it suits David Cameron to have that grey area rather than know what the official position is and perhaps to be allowed in the EU. I think one of the reasons as well, we mentioned earlier on about having the largest, would then be the EU's largest supplier of oil and natural gas, of the fishing industry, and of one of the most forward-thinking renewable energy countries, and all these different opportunities that and all the money that Scotland would bring to the EU. These different industries at the moment are currently working very well in Scotland, with unemployment in Scotland currently being at a lower level than the UK as a whole, and it's performing better with more people at work, fewer people unemployed, and fewer people claiming benefits as a percentage of the country.
So, but if Scotland is doing so well in all of these statistics, why would you want to change things? Would it not be better to carry on with the level of governance or perhaps greater devolution?
This is true.
And Scotland can continue to benefit from being part of the Union like that?
This is true. There is a good argument for either further devolution. However, there are still many powers, especially over the economy. It's the Scottish Government thoroughly believes that an independent Scotland economy, being able to regulate it ourselves and to decide on taxes, would not only benefit our economy but also the people who live in Scotland, to be able to have a better income and to be able to manage themselves more justly. And especially when there are other great wastes of money from the UK government, such as the Trident, the nuclear missiles, which are currently up for renewal at a cost of several £100 million, which are based less than an hour's drive from Scotland's most populated city, but are not Scotland's to use. And it's a dumping ground for them to be so close to Scotland's largest, most populated city, and costing so much, with the Scottish taxpayer paying so much money for something that we cannot ourselves use. And I think that is another income which the Scottish economy would benefit from as an independent country without having to pay out for the nuclear weapons.
And defence is, as you touched on there, is a very, very interesting subject. There's been talk of an independent Scotland continuing to share defence resources with England or with the rest of the United Kingdom, as has been seen with the shared use of aircraft carriers between Britain and France. Do you think that would be an option here?
It may well be an option. I think the difficulty is that because there are so many Scots in the British Army and as part of the Marines, it's always going to be a difficult one to divide soldiers between which country they would rather fight for. So perhaps to have a joint military would be useful, although I'm sure that the Scotland may be able to function well enough to have a standard army of its own size. For example, with other Scandinavian countries, Norway in particular, which also have a very, very small army, but it serves them well enough, and they don't go into illegal wars such as Iraq, which was the SNP voted against However, the other parties in the Scottish Government of Labour and the Conservatives voted for the war in Iraq, which obviously cost so many lives, which is something like that an independent Scottish Government would not rush into.
I'd like to just take it back a step. You mentioned Trident earlier on. Now, Alex Salmond has come out and said that he is against nuclear weapons being based in Scotland.
Yeah.
And again, as you mentioned, Trident is currently located just near Glasgow, which poses certain risks potentially. However, Alex Salmond has also said that an independent Scotland would apply for membership of NATO,
Yes.
which is a nuclear organisation.
Mm-hmm.
And as part of Scotland's membership, they would potentially be required to have nuclear weapons based there from other member states.
Right.
So is it not possible that that won't change anything in terms of the safety of Scottish people?
Well, at the moment, one of the difficulties with Trident is that although it's currently at the Faz Lane base near Glasgow, there aren't any other bases sufficiently equipped to hold nuclear weapons. So if Scotland were to vote for independence, it could conceivably take several years for any other of the UK bases to equip themselves well enough to handle the nuclear weapons. However, over I think 3/4 of the countries currently in NATO do not have any nuclear weapons, and so it would not be a great surprise or a great upset for Scotland not to have nuclear weapons either, since the vast majority don't actually have any, such as Norway themselves.
But as you said, that there is no other base in the United Kingdom capable of housing these weapons.
Yeah.
So it's eminently possible that the Trident weapons would be kept in Scotland for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the problems that the UK government would have to face would be, firstly, the most advanced bases currently in the UK are in Plymouth and Portsmouth, which are under 2 hours from London, which the UK government would be very hesitant in putting the nuclear weapons there, close to the financial capital of the entire country. Another problem as well of having Trident in Scotland is that the SNP have said if they win the referendum, they will then have a written constitution to outlaw nuclear weapons in Scotland, in which case it would perhaps be forced upon the British government to move the nuclear weapons out of Scotland due to it being an illegal requirement of a written constitution.
I'd like to move on to another argument that is often made, particularly amongst English people, that Scotland is welcome to its independence because they are subsidised by the United Kingdom. I wondered if you had anything to say about that. Yeah,
it's something that's said very often that the Scottish Government and Scotland in general is subsidised by the British government. However, there are figures for the last 30 years, for over the last 30 years at least, with Scotland having 8.4% of the British population, they've actually been paying over 9% of the tax towards Westminster. So for each of the last 30 years, whether the economy is strong or weak, the taxpayers in Scotland have each been paying and contributing more tax to Westminster than any other country and any other citizen of the United Kingdom. And I would touch again on the point of the oil, just bringing that into the argument. Again, because we have 8% of the population, 8.4, that's the benefit that we have, or that's what the percentage that we benefit from oil, whereas over 90% is actually taken from Scottish water if we were to be independent.
So there's no risk to policies, for example, like free university education or free prescriptions.
I think that's a difficult one, because the SNP have said that, again, if they were to vote for independence and the written constitution in that bill, they would include a right to free education, perhaps free prescription fees, and even the right to have a home, which, if you include them in a written constitution, was something they would have to stick to, and the other parties, if they were to come into government, would have to stick to as well. However, I see that being a very difficult promises to keep, especially if they're to get put into a constitution. I think it'd be very difficult in years ahead to keep to those, and I think to put that into a written constitution would be a danger of threatening the economy in future years.
Okay, I think that's all we've got time for.
I'm David McEwan.
I'm Craig Barrett. That's good night from him.
I'm not finishing this one.
You meant to say it's good night from me.
Too cheesy.